Okay, so in 2024, I spent a lot of my personal spending budget on books, and this year I have spent a lot on actual hard copies of books versus the Audible or Kindle editions of books, which I have spent the last 10 years of my life only reading books on Audible or Kindle. I have been in a mood lately to actually feel the books in my hand as I am reading them, and so I've spent most of my personal spending budget on books, and I wanted to go through my worst, best, and middle tier reads of 2024. So I'm going to start with the worst reads of 2024. These are the books that I honestly wish hadn't spent the money or the time reading. I wish I was the type to DNF more books than I do, where I really do try to finish books when I start reading them, because sometimes books get really good towards the middle or towards the end, and I like to give those books a chance. That was not the case with The Witch and the Tsar by Olesya Salnikova-Gilmore. I actually DNF'd this book. I started it and I just couldn't get into it. I don't know if the timing of this book is wrong, because this is a book I should ordinarily like. It is based on the Slavic sort of fantasy of Baba Yaga, and I did study Slavic languages and literature in university, so this is kind of the folktale, fairy tale fantasy that I would be into, and for some reason I was not. I did not finish this. I haven't decided if I'm going to go straight away and donate this or give it away, or if I intend to keep it and try it on another day and see if it's just the timing of the book and reading the book that is the reason that I didn't like it. Haven't decided yet, but it does fall under my worst reads of 2024. The next book that I read in 2024 was A Fate Inked in Blood by Daniel Jensen. I actually thought this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. It's based off of Nordic fantasy or mythology. I read through it really quickly. I think I was finished with it in like a day or a day and a half. That said, I feel no qualms just donating it or giving it away. Like, I don't want to keep it in my library. I'm not interested in having it, which means it just didn't make that much of an impression on me, even though I had a fun time reading it. Yeah, I'm not really super interested in what happens next in the next book. I'm giving it away today. So yeah, next book is called The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. This was fun. It takes place in the cloisters in New York City. It follows in an art history graduate. It has the sort of dark academia vibe going on. I think the problem with this book, it was just so forgettable and underwhelming, and the characters were fine. Everything about this book was fine. I didn't absolutely hate it. I didn't have that much fun reading it either. It just was, and so it's one of the most underwhelming reads of 2024, and I will be giving it away, and I don't feel bad about that. The next book is actually a really popular one, and so I feel, I don't know, like kind of guilty, but it's Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Everybody loves this book, and I think this is by the same author who wrote Shadow and Bone, which I haven't finished that trilogy yet either. I finished the first one. I'm a little bit into the second one. I thought this was dark, like in a jaded kind of way, which I understand. That's like part of its vibe. It takes place at Yale, so it is dark academia. And again, that should be something that I would otherwise ordinarily be very, very much into. But I found it a little bit boring, and I didn't like the characters or connect to them too much. And so for that reason, this is one of my underwhelming reads for 2024. I don't know that I'm going to go in and read the second one unless it comes out on Kindle Unlimited one day. Then I might just do it, just because it's there. But yeah, I don't wish I hadn't spent the money on this. So I will be donating this one as well. Now, there's only one book in 2024 that like actively upset me. And again, I think this is another really popular one. And so I feel a little bit bad about it, but it was so upsetting. And that was A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. I have not read a book quite this boring, I think, maybe ever. And I was a history major. Like, it takes place at Oxford. There are witches, there are vampires, there are spells. I mean, it has everything that you would think I would love this book. And I found it infuriating for only one reason, and that is because it is a long one, like compared to some of these other books. Now, I love long books, but given I was in my I need to give the book a chance sort of mood, I did stick through reading the entirety of this book. And by the end of it, I was so upset. I did not believe the stakes. I thought the love story between the witch and the vampire was perhaps the most boring love story. I have never been as non-committal about a couple in any book I have ever read in my entire life. Like, the whole thing was just like a wet blanket the entire time. I don't know. It just wasn't for me. And I know a lot of people love this book, and I respect people who love this book. People have all different tastes. But if you have taste that's anything like mine, the time I wish I could get back. This was another one that I brought back from London, and I wasted suitcase space and money and time reading it. And there were a couple books I left on the shelf because I had to make some cuts at Foyles. And I wish this was one of them. And then I watched the TV show to just find out like maybe the book is bad, but the TV series is better. Usually the reverse is often true. And no, the TV series is also bad. It is just bad. TV series is slightly better than the book, but worst book of 2024 for me. Now I'm going to get into my mid-tier reads. And these are the books that like I really enjoyed. I had a fun time reading them. I would probably keep them on my bookshelf unless I really had to make cuts because I've just read so many good ones. But they just weren't books that are like living in my brain that I think about all the time, but I had a great time while I was reading them. I may donate some of them, I may not, but yeah. I have a big pile of these actually. So the first one is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. It was a lot of fun. I read it in like half a day or something like that. Really quick to get through. They only had the hardcover at the English language bookstore where I live. And so I did buy the hardcover. I wish I didn't buy the hardcover just because they do cost more. But at the same time, it is such a beautiful cover. And that is probably the only reason I'm hanging on to this book. It looks amazing on my bookshelf over in my bedroom. I just love it. The artist did a wonderful job on this book cover. The story was fun. Really cute little typewritery romance type situation. Does it stick with me? No, not really. I thought it was cute. It is YA, and I love YA. But like, it just didn't do it for me. There aren't these big stakes that I tend to really enjoy in fantasy. So yeah, it was okay. Solid 3-star read for 2024. Okay, the next solid 3-star read was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. And again, this is another one that people seem to absolutely adore. And I will say, the world in this book is really, really interesting. It's really, really different from any fantasy that I've read recently. The dragons, when they die, they turn into moons in the sky, which I thought fascinating. Would I read book 2? Sure. Like, if I'm bored and I want a quick read, this was another one that went by pretty quickly. Again, I wasn't super into the romance between the two characters. And I'm not really a romance girl in general. I don't mind them in my fantasy books as like side stories, even if they're the main. This one was just not. It's another one that I was just really underwhelmed. Another reason this isn't leaving my bookshelf is actually less about the story itself. And I just love the cover. It like glitters. And the other thing is like at the start of each chapter, it has this beautiful, like, I think dragon art going on. So I'm having a really hard time giving this one away. But I would say it was a solid 3 stars. I had a great time. But again, I'm keeping it on my bookshelf more because the covers are so lovely as opposed to because I love these books so much. But they were fun. They were fun. I don't feel bad that I bought them like I do with the other ones in my other category. Okay, this one's going to be a tricky one because I started my Brandon Sanderson journey this year, and I started with the Mistborn trilogy, which everyone tells you to start with. So I read The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. He is supposed to be like the king of fantasy. And I see why. I really do see why. This was really a complex world. He likes these really hard magic systems. So the allomancy, like these metals that certain people with the power can swallow, and they do different things, like super fascinating. Got a kick out of that. The world was interesting. The stakes were there, very complex. There's like politics in this. So really enjoyed all of that. When I finished it though, I was just like, okay. And it's not because it was bad. It was really, really good. I just think I didn't connect to the characters the way that I personally have to in order to really like a book. So I will say it was super well written. I'm really glad I read it. I am continuing with The Well of Ascension, but the hype around it, I'm not totally sure I understand, although respect, of course, to Brandon Sanderson because it was really well done, but I'm hoping it picks up speed in the next books. I also just started Tress of the Emerald Sea, which I think is absolutely lovely, but I haven't finished it yet, which is why it's not in this video. So yes, the Mistborn trilogy, I haven't finished it either, but at least The Final Empire fell solidly in like a 3.5, 3.8 realm for me for 2024. Okay, and the final one of the okay reads for 2024 is another series. There are 3 books out, and that would be the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. I like Sarah J. Maas. I especially liked her Throne of Glass series. And I think she's one of those authors that like people sometimes like to underestimate, but it's really easy to get lost into her worlds regardless. This one, however, I did like the world building. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was unnecessarily complex, but maybe the series is not done yet. So maybe it's like going somewhere. I don't know. I had fun reading it. I read all 3 of these in like the span of like a week and a half. And these are some like monster monster thick books, okay? Had a great time. I'm having a hard time, though, giving them away, which leads me to believe that they're not my most underwhelming reads of 2024, which leads me to believe there is something about them that I really liked that I can't put my finger on. But I really did not connect with the characters. Again, another sort of wet blanket romance. It was unnecessary, I think. It was so not fun romantically and I so did not connect with the characters that I think that the book could have been fine without those plot lines. So yes, I would solidly give this. See, and I originally gave it 2 point something or 3, but then the more I read and the more I see what's out there, I'm no, she's much more talented than that. And these books were much better than that. So I'm kind of in a 3 point something for Sarah J. Maas's Crescent City. I don't want to give them away for some reason though, so I must like them to some extent. I think this goes into my mid-tier reads, but it was so, so good. And that was the Prison Healer trilogy by Lynette Noni. YA, just a hoot and a half. Basically, it was just so much fun. The twists and turns in these books really had me screaming at the end of each one. But if you're looking for a good time in a fantasy world, YA, fast-paced, easy to read, easy to love the characters, then I would highly recommend this trilogy. Solidly 4.3 stars. It falls into my upper end of my okay to read books of 2024. Really enjoyed it. So yeah, it's The Prison Healer, The Gilded Cage, and The Blood Trader. Out of the way. Okay, so these are my top reads for 2024. Now, I have a mix of books in here. I do sense a theme of dark academia in my top books for 2024. Most of these books kind of come with an important message or critique of the world in some way, which I love it when fantasy does that, except one trilogy, which it just has a special place in my heart. I just love it so, so much. So I'm going to keep it up in the 5-star because I just cannot get it out of my mind. I reread it all the time, and that's the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. So much fun, but so much fun and so sweet and so whimsical and magical, and I just can't get enough of this book, and I can't call it a mid-tier read, even though I don't think there's any sort of important message going on in this trilogy, but it is purely fun, just so much fun, so sweet, fantasy, romantic, fairy tale, just lovely. It is YA, so it reads really, really quickly. Yeah, so that's just up there as I think just one of those books that just makes me happy. The next read for 2024, which is also YA, was A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. This one just took me by surprise, and I think that's why it's up there in my top tier reads for 2024. I didn't see this one coming. I kind of read it thinking it was going to be kind of a fun YA dark academia book, and it was moody and sometimes creepy, and yeah, and it did kind of have some commentary. I mean, in this world there is it's a bit patriarchal, so only men can study literature, women can study architecture, I guess. I don't know why it delineates in that way exactly. So yeah, it took me by surprise. I would give this a 4.3 stars. Really enjoyed it. It's YA, so it goes really fast, but it's a lot moodier than I thought it would be, and it definitely covers themes of SA and abuse of power. So it did have a kind of heavier feel to it than I was expecting going into this. I thought this was going to be more of a palate cleanser type of book. 'Twas not. It definitely packed a punch on its own. And then these 3, one of these is a standalone, one of these is a series, and one of these is the first book in a series, but the rest of it has not come out yet. Best book, and I started this year out strong, and that was with Babel by R.F. Kuang, Babel or the Necessity of Violence. This takes place at Oxford. See, if it takes place at Oxford, I don't know how you messed that up. At the Royal Institute of Translation. And it has a magic system that is very much based on language. And so I found that really, really fascinating. It is a very light on the fantasy, I would say, and heavy on the academia. So there's a lot of talk about linguistics and the power of language and what is said or left unsaid, but very, very powerful critique of imperialism, colonialism, and sort of the ways that the structures that are developed as a result uphold certain values in people and oppress others. And so I think that is very important and timely. This book absolutely blew my mind. When I read it, I was screaming like every 5 seconds. I've highlighted this book to death. There are quotes in this book that I quote all the time because it just comes up all the time. So really recommend this one if you're looking for something really deep and meaningful. And for a fantasy that can do that, I think that is very impressive. Okay, and the next one is the first book in a series. It is The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is, I think it takes place in like a Roman world, but it's a fantasy. Slash maybe some people have been saying that it's kind of sci-fi. I mean, there is some techy type elements that maybe would throw it into that realm. I don't know that this takes place in the future though. It's unclear, but it's definitely like Roman times. See, that's what's hard about fantasy because you don't know often like what time period you're in. In the fantasy world, it seems to be based in like a Roman Empire world, but there is technology in it. So it can be a little confusing, but I just thought it was really fast paced. It was really clever. It made me question a lot, like who are these systems meant to benefit? The systems that we live in. Our capitalist system, who are they meant to benefit? Do they really benefit us or do they make us think that they're meant to benefit us? Either way, thought it was really smart, thought it was really fun on top of it. And so if you can combine both fun and smart, that's a top tier read for me. So this goes up in my top reads of 2024. And the last, and I think this might have been like my most favorite, it would be the Scholomance trilogy by Naomi Novik. I picked up this book on a whim because I liked the cover, and I do totally judge books by their cover, sorry. So I picked this up on a whim, had never heard of it before. This is not a new book by any means. And started reading it and thought it was going to be really bad because it felt kind of like a stream of consciousness info dump as I started it. And then it just got funny and like weird and in the most endearing possible way. This school has no teachers or professors. It's just like independent study with monsters in it and these kids are just trying to survive. So it took a while for me to figure out what was going on, and then I just thought it was so clever. And the discourse on like class and privilege and what that means for some people who can get ahead in these systems that are presumably merit-based but maybe are not as much as we believe them to be. So I thought that was a really important message, and as this series kept going with The Last Graduate and The Golden Enclaves, I felt like it got more and more interesting. The characters really were very lovable. And then it also made you question, who do we step on in the world so that our children can succeed and be safe? Who are we willing to step on for the safety of our own kids? And so it really makes you think of the way our systems work, the way nations work, the way nations oppress each other, and not always necessarily because they're bad, inherently evil, but rather everyone's trying to protect their own. It talks about how like sometimes in our world, in this world is a fantasy world, but how we might be willing to sell ourselves to the highest bidder in order to make ourselves more powerful, to make ourselves safe. She says, I want to be safe and I really wouldn't mind a little bit of comfort and even a taste of luxury now and again. It's all I've been hungry for my whole life. I wanted to pretend that all of that was fair and okay, like Orion bleeding, how we've got the same chances. But I can't pretend that because I didn't grow up in that lie, and so I actually don't want in. I don't want that safety and comfort and luxury at the cost of other kids dying in here. And sure, it's not like that. It's not some simple equation like me in an enclave means kids are dying in here. The kids will go on dying in here anyway, whether I'm in an enclave or not. But just because it's a 46th order derivative equation or something doesn't mean that I can't work out which side of that equation is the guilty one. And isn't that just not, at least in the West, in the capitalist world that I'm familiar with, really what we all try to do, right, is to be safe, to have a little bit of comfort and some luxury every now and again. And there's this 46th derivative equation of someone somewhere in the world that we might be hurting and trying to secure that for ourselves and for our families and for our children. Would highly recommend it. Beautiful, endearing, important, has a strong message. I think this is one of my favorites. Okay, so that's it for my most underwhelming, good, and best reads of 2024. My most underwhelming reads I really wish I hadn't spent the time or the money, and I will be donating those this afternoon. And hopefully, books are so personal, and you try your best to invest wisely in books that you hopefully are going to like, but because everyone's taste is so different, and writing a book is such an intensive endeavor, and you never know whether someone else's recommendation is necessarily going to be to your taste, that you ultimately sometimes do do end up spending time and money on things that are not really for you. And that's just part of the reading experience. So hopefully you can sell those books or donate those books or let a friend have those books that are more to their taste. If your taste is anything like mine, if you've read any of these books and kind of agree with my take on them, then maybe you will find some of the books that I really, really loved wonderful and to your taste as well. So that's it for today, and I hope to see you next time.